This is SMNI News Channel. Truth that matters.
Good evening. You're watching SMNI. This is Business and Politics. I'm your host, Dante Klinka. Our guest is Christopher Nelson, the Executive Director and Trustee of the British Chamber of Commerce of the Philippines. He's no stranger to this country, having worked for Fortune Tobacco Corporation and Philip Morris Philippines for decades. Besides his current position at the Chamber, he's the Director of the Philippine National Bank and Chairman of the Trust Committee. For its part, the Chamber supports the development of its members' business and social interests in the British and Philippine communities, helping them achieve their objectives. Today, it represents more than 300 member companies and individuals. It has a network of more than 1,200 entrepreneurs and senior executives of multinational corporations and SMEs. Given that, our discussion today will revolve around business and investments. Our general questions for Mr. Nelson will be, how can the Philippines attract more foreign investors? Chris?
Great to see you again.
Please.
Thank you.
Mr. Nelson, if you don't mind, maybe I can call you Chris.
By all means.
Thank you for making time for Business and Politics.
A pleasure.
All right. So the last time we talked to each other was, your visit to the Manila Times, and since then, we've been hearing these things from different people about the ease of doing business in the Philippines. And the Philippines already has a law, right? But I was wondering why people keep bringing it up. I mean, from your perspective, what's the situation on the ground? What's the missing pieces to actually making easier for you guys to be here?
So I think the ease of business will always be a discussion topic.
Okay.
And I think in the case of the Philippines, I'll give you a couple of an example. So obviously during the Duterte administration, at the very end, they passed 3 bills.
Right.
One was the Retail Trade Act, Foreign Investment Act, and the third one is the Public Service Act.
Yeah.
Now, to my knowledge, the Public Service Act still does not have the implementing rules and regulations.
No, it doesn't,
The other two do.
Yeah.
And to me, that probably kind of highlights some of the challenges. And the reason for that is, if you take the Retail Trade Act, they designated department to do the IRR was the Department of Trade and Investment. It was done very quickly.
Okay.
We were asked to consult. If you now look at the Public Service Act, it involves multiple agencies. That's where things become much more complicated and delayed. Now, I think when we come back to ease of doing business, we have to be realistic and focused. So I'll give you an example as well. So some years ago, we were invited to a meeting at the Department of Trade and Investment, DTI, who of course want to encourage investment of foreign companies and so forth. If you look at setting up a company in the Philippines, I think it'll be very difficult to emulate Singapore.
Yeah, you can open a company and dissolve it on the same day, probably.
I mean, it's like in hours.
Yeah.
So I think what we've got to look at in the Philippines is, what is our advantage? We want to get companies here because this in itself is a very important market. And now we can also use that as a gateway to Southeast Asia. So we need to kind of focus on what companies need to get here. And I think where it can do, improve particularly individual departments or agencies, their own processes. Obviously, if you do it electronically, that's a big help.
Okay.
I mean, as somebody who's a permanent resident of the Philippines, one example as a personal note is that you can renew your driving license much easier.
Okay.
And now it goes from, I think it was 3 years, then
now
it was 5 years,
yeah.
now it's 10 years.
Yeah.
So I can renew on my next birthday next month to 10 years.
It's 10 years, but unfortunately, I think you have to go back to the LTO to get your medical exam every 3 years. But granted, it's been a big improvement.
I mean, I think this is the way we got to look at it. What can individual departments do, and what can be done in terms of electronic process, right? Submissions, so
digitalization.
So, you know, to come to your point, well, why does it make a difference? Of course, companies coming will always look how easy is it for them to do business compared to other venues. But we've got to look at what advantages we have here and try to get them here, and then say, yes, you can expand now into Southeast Asia. And that's why the ratification of RCEP, which was
so important,
is so important.
Yeah. Now, you know, in Congress, and you know, they're talking about amending the Constitution under the auspices of making the business easier. Do you think that's a solution, or the argument against that is that there are many other things that can be done simpler, less politically divisive than amending the Constitution? In practical terms, you said it may not be fair. I think you said that before when we met, that it may not be fair to compare the Philippines to Singapore, but certainly, there should be some improvement, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way you got to look at this is that, and I'll come to your other question, is that the Philippines has to focus on its advantages, right? Right. I think it's very hard to, as you rightly said, Singapore is a very good example where you can make a company in hours or dissolve in hours. Yeah. And that's very hard to, almost anywhere in the world, let's be honest.
Yes.
Now, if I come to the specific question of the charter change, let me make a couple of points. The first is the Philippines, if I understand correctly, in its constitution has economic barriers.
Right.
They're known as
land ownership.
Yeah. Negative investment.
Equity caps, yes.
Now, that's quite unusual for a constitution, first of all. So from that point of view, I do think it is worth considering. However, we're also cognizant that the Constitution obviously embraces a much broader base, and that will obviously raise concerns. I think that is always I think removing those economic provisions would be very useful.
Okay.
No doubt. Can they be done in other ways? You could pass specific laws to have those provisions changed, as I understand it. I would think, of course, the process may be longer, could be challenged. But I think that the trend here to further liberalize the Philippine economy is very good.
Okay.
And one thing I just want to emphasize to everybody who might be watching is the Philippines does not operate in isolation.
Okay.
So we're competing against many other countries in Southeast Asia, and they are also trying to improve.
Absolutely.
So therefore, for us to really get that investment and to get people, we need to keep that liberalization trend continuing. And I would just like to make, I think, a reference. There was a recent article by, I don't know if it's a media interview, I think it was an interview, from Secretary Pascual.
Okay.
And he was talking about RCEP. Mm-hmm. And he said, and I thought that was a very fair point, let's focus on the advantages of RCEP and not the potential disadvantages. It's always a way of looking at things.
Sure.
It's the half cup, half full kind of thing. And I think that was a very fair point. So, yes, I understand the concerns. I do think there's a key to keep the momentum going. And if we can further liberalize and open up the Philippine economy, and there will be issues like land ownership, of course, but obviously investing is key for companies, then I think you'll see further benefits coming forward.
Okay. Well, I was just wondering, and if you don't mind me pressing this point a bit. The last time we saw each other was at the Manila Times Economic Forum, and one of the speakers, Ambassador Melvin of Denmark, was saying that, half jokingly, that the Philippines was very good at innovating red tape. And he had some anecdotal stories. Fun, he was being funny about it, but he was saying that, he just arrived in the Philippines at a certain month, and then his experience with the Bureau of Customs, I think bringing in his car and his items was just not a pleasant one. And of course, he asked no questions because he's assigned here. But I would think that for businesses, that would be quite concerning. I mean, I was wondering if you've heard of similar anecdotes from your members, right? That some low-hanging fruits that the government could look at, right, before it opens up, this whole thing about charter change.
Yeah, I think the key you've got to change actually is outlook and attitude. In the sense,
Okay.
let me come to let me give you an example.
Okay.
And I'll relate it. So we're reviving the Great British Festival. It will take place this month, 25th, 26th. So that's Saturday, Sunday of March in Bonifacio Global City. And there'll be display of obviously British companies, and there'll be culture, obviously British music and arts, and it's being set up. I mean, the proponent is the embassy. We're helping to manage it, and the British Council is involved in the cultural program. Now, why do I raise this? We're doing it in a very short time frame.
Okay.
And because it's a very short time frame, we've made a deliberate decision to go for companies who are already here.
Okay.
So major leagues will be there, like Shell, Pru Life. We've also got some of our new members. We have one called CyberQ, which focuses on cybersecurity, a very relevant topic, et cetera, et cetera. Now, of course, this would be a great venue to bring in new products.
Right.
But we took the decision not to do it because we know getting it cleared by customs, by also the FDA, Food and Drug Agency, would take too long.
Right.
And to bring it to a specific point, we had a virtual trade mission in September with the Kent County Council. That's a council, an area just outside London. And one of the speakers, or I think they were, one of the speakers was the FDA. Now, after that was over, the companies wanted to send samples. These are not commercially to be sold, but samples to various companies. And it took us 6 weeks, even though we had a contact with FDA, and then customs, because of the different, well, I need this, all that. So for me, this is an example, right? It's a sample. They're not going to sell it commercially.
Right.
But if you want to start a business, of course, the Philippine companies, the importers want to see the product.
Absolutely.
So these are areas where we need to improve. And the issue, of course, comes is that customers will say, well, look, I'm only following what I'm supposed to do, right?
Right.
In all fairness. And likewise for the FDA.
Right.
So it needs to have a thing where, okay, it's a sample. We're not going to be selling it to the consumer. We're not going to go on the retail market. But the companies concerned need to see, discuss it, and without that, it's very hard to make a decision. And that's kind of, I think, crystallized a small example, and I linked it to the festival. And we had a company, actually, who does bring in new brands, and they also concurred and said, look, it's too short a time. So, and I think we've got to change things where people say, okay, I want to do business, right?
Right.
And if we want to do business, we have to be doing it in a way that makes sense. So clearly, for example, if you're only bringing in 5 or 6 or a limited quantity, it's not for commercial concerns. Right. And it's not going to be by the consumer. So you can, there's a less risk, right? You're just looking at it from a commercial side. And you can move those things forward. And that's just one example, right? So, but I do think the ease of doing business is a very distinct challenge. And I say that because it requires somebody going through process. It requires, and I always say that, and I'll come back to my first example, it tends to work best when one department has it. But without that, and it really requires, and I don't underestimate the challenge. But I do think it can work. And if that moves forward, then I think we can, it's another advantage to us, or another opportunity.
All right. Well, we'll just have to take a quick break, Chris.
Sure.
We'll be right back with Business and Politics with Mr. Chris Nelson of the British Chamber.
Problema nyo, itawag kay Panelo. Ikaw ba'y may suliranin na may kinalaman sa mga ahensya ng ating pamahalaan? Inihahandog ng SMNI ang programang makakapiling ninyo sa araw-araw na maaari ninyong maging daingan. Tampok ang dating Chief Legal Counsel ng nakaraang Pangulo, ang veteranong abogado na si Attorney Salvador Sal Panelo.
Bishops.
Tulong at payo tagapamagitan sa ating mga lingkod bayan. Problema nyo, itawag kay Panelo. Lunes hanggang Biyernes alas 9 hanggang alas 10 ng umaga dito lamang sa SMNI. Ang totoong boses ng bayan.
Did you know that water is the only drink that can quench your thirst? Drink Galilee Purified Drinking Water. Every bottle undergoes advanced scientific process to ensure a safe, clean, and pure bottle. So what are you waiting for? Drink Galilee Drinking Water. Every bottle is a labor of love. For delivery, contact Galilee Purified Drinking Water at 0956-658-4195 or 0998-466-0202 or 8572-1869.
Welcome back to SMNI. This is Business and Politics. We're talking to Mr. Nelson of the British Chamber. You were saying earlier before the break that, the Philippines has to build on its strengths. And I was just curious about, from your personal perspective, because you've done business all over the world. What are those advantages as a British businessman sees it?
So, my experience, of course, is working in the UK. I worked extensively in the Middle East. I lived in Saudi Arabia for over 10 years. I lived in Dubai, UAE, visited all through. And I've been in the Philippines close to 20 years. So I think the Philippines, first of all, I think number one advantage is the people, right?
That's why you married one, huh?
I hope this is going to be watched by my wife, darling. No, sure.
She's our number one ambassador.
Well, I do think actually that's a big factor, actually.
Yeah, the Filipinos living abroad, right?
I think Filipinos can integrate very well. So there's 200,000 in the UK. And people, I know of lots of friends who, of course, are wives of Filipinos, and now we become friends. So what are the advantages? I do think the people is a key advantage.
Okay.
And that's also a bit of a watch out, so I'll come to that point. So I think the skills of the Philippines, obviously English, language, cultural, I think that's a key factor. The fact that you can easily assimilate with foreigners and foreigners can easily assimilate is a tremendous advantage. And you've got very high technical skills. Obviously people are sought after, the workforce in the UK specifically, of course, the healthcare sector, in shipping in terms of across the world, in hospitality and so forth. So the watch out, of course, is that you need to keep on, that your educational institutions are keeping up as well.
Right.
And that's a challenge, I think. And of course, the challenge is also you need those talented people here as well. Now, the reason I emphasize this, I think the Philippines has got those talents, and we've seen in the time that I've been here, the economy grow. Now, part of that is also to further support the infrastructure. And we know that the Philippines has definite challenges in respect to transport, public transport.
We're just coming off a strike recently, right?
Well, transport, because that was driven by the fact that jeepney people are concerned because they want to phase out those jeepneys and replace them with electronic or electric jeepneys. Yeah. So I think that travel and commuting here and infrastructure, and that's why it was obviously part of the mission under the Duterte, and obviously it's been mentioned, I think, in the State of the Nation address, and it's further emphasized the need to invest in infrastructure and e-infrastructure, all the internet. And when I talk about other companies, let's talk specifically about the UK, right?
Okay.
So, you know, for me, and it's great to see the fact that the economic teams, that was Secretary Jokno, and I think people from the budget management.
Yeah, I think Pangandaman, Secretary Pangandaman was in the UK.
Correct.
Yeah?
They all went to the UK. They'd obviously been in Davos.
That's right.
They went to Frankfurt, and then they went on to the UK. And that's great to see. And I was involved in one which took place in 2018. That was led by, of course, then Secretary of Finance Dominguez.
Right.
And obviously Secretary Lopez was there, the former DTI. But the thing is, you have to keep doing it.
Okay.
I mean, so for example, in the UK, I'm sure you'll have people from Indonesia, from Malaysia, from Thailand, and you've got to try and keep this up, right? And the point I'm trying to get to is we need to keep the Philippines as a focus as well.
Okay.
And in that context, you know, this is a 70 year of relations between the two countries. And, you know, I think we also have to be, you know, candid or realistic. Obviously, the Philippines has long-standing ties with the United States, which we fully understand. And for example, the American Chamber, who we closely work with, is much bigger than our chamber, understandably so. So we need to kind of use our advantages and say to people, look, the Philippines is an opportunity to work. You've seen the workforce. Obviously, there's tremendous success in terms of the business outsourcing and so forth, but also there's opportunities in certain key sectors. And if you come back now to pushing that, we have to keep reminding people there are opportunities here.
Right.
And, you know, that we do it in our own way, as does the British Embassy here, as does the Philippine Embassy in London.
Right.
And they have a Department of Trade or Trade and Investment section led by a lady called Michelle Sanchez. So, but and the reason I want to say this is I think sometimes with people, you know, we've passed the law, so therefore, ergo, it should happen.
Right. They forget about the execution.
No, you got to pass the law and the implementing rules.
Right.
And then you got to work at it to get people to know about it and bring them in.
And refine it. Yeah.
And bring them in.
Yeah.
So we welcome very much when these things are passed, and I think legislation is important, but it's only part of it.
Right.
And
getting it done is another thing.
Yeah, and you know, constantly trying to reach out, right? And that's why I think it's very important that we have the festival. And I'll give all credit to, actually it was the, you know, to the ambassador, and particularly the deputy ambassador, a gentleman called Alistair White, who we're working with, who wanted to revive it. Now, it's a very short time frame compared to how we used to do it.
Right.
Hope we'll pull it off. But I think for me, these are all good things, but it's constantly trying to remind people, first of all, that there are a lot of British companies already here. And that's always good because success stories always helps going back. And then I think it's good because it creates more of an impact and you know, traction. So for me, it's about constantly highlighting, you know, you asked me why I came. Okay, so I came here because I fell in love with my wife, but I like the country. I mean, I've been here many, many times. I very much enjoy living here.
Yeah, and you could have lived back in the UK, I mean, right? I mean,
well, you know, I think COVID is a good example because COVID obviously was a challenge to many people on many different fronts. But I think it kind of brought people closer to family, in my opinion, because you were cut off for a long, we didn't see our daughter for 2 years. I mean, we saw her virtually, but physically.
Right.
And that's why we spend quite a lot of time in Europe, specifically in Portugal, because we're closer to our children.
Right.
But now I've been back and I really enjoy the Philippines. You know, it's like you've never been away. And that is, and a lot of people enjoy living here because it's, you know, the people are friendly. It's the atmosphere, right? You live in countries where you feel comfortable.
Right. Well, what would be comparable to the Philippines? A lot of people here praise Vietnam or maybe mention it when they say that it's moving along faster than the Philippines. I wouldn't say it's quite there yet, but it is progressing rapidly, right?
Yeah, I've been to Vietnam. I think Vietnam is, so first of all, Vietnam is the population, if I recall correctly, about 90 million.
Yeah.
The Philippines is now
110, something like that.
110 plus. One of the advantages Vietnam, of course, has is close to China. So
that's an advantage.
One of the discussion points was if companies wish to relocate or put factories, they'll move to Vietnam because it's very close
across the border.
Yeah. The other thing which I think is an advantage, as I understand, is that Vietnam can make very quick decisions on investments, where the Philippines, of course, in all fairness, has Congress, has a process. So for companies, of course, they like speed of decision making, right? So Vietnam is a challenge. And I think, I think what the Philippines needs to look at, which I think, in all fairness, it is doing, is to focus on what can we do well?
Okay.
What is our advantage in this, right? And that's why I mentioned Secretary Pascual's article. I think that was very relevant, you know, i.e., let's look at these advantages of RCEP, of which there are
many,
very high number, and not to be constantly looking at, well, these are potential risks. So for me, the Philippines, you know, look, it's come from a very challenging time. Obviously, the economy, GDP in most countries went down in 2020, which is the full year of the pandemic. Right. And we've seen recovery, and I think now probably you're looking obviously this year between 6.5% growth. Inflation is a key challenge, as it is in many countries. But I do think that the economy has come back probably stronger than anticipated.
Do you think we've turned a corner? I mean, the most recent inflation figures was, you know, a welcome improvement. That was followed a few days later, but, you know, the better than expected unemployment figures is that, you know, enough to worry, or I mean enough to say?
Well, I do think it is. I do think so. First of all, I'd say a couple of points. There are macroeconomic factors that the Philippines can't control.
Yeah.
Obviously, the single biggest impact a year ago was the start of the Ukraine-Russian conflict. That, of course, produced immediately impact on oil and gas prices, which have now started to stabilize because, of course, people are able to react and to plan. So, and of course, you're seeing that with oil prices coming down a bit. They sometimes go back up again. But so I think that's had an impact. Yes, I think inflation is beginning to turn the corner. I do think that growth and economic activity has come back. I think that tourism and visits has significantly obviously changed since the removal of travel restrictions. And there's still a lot of even more opportunities there, right? So yes, I think we have turned the corner. You can't negate the fact that the Philippines, as I said, doesn't operate in isolation. So if the US Fed tomorrow even will make a decision to increase interest rates, it will put pressure on the Philippine peso. But that's something you can do. But you know, in all fairness, whatever Secretary Jokno and Medalla, who's the BSP governor, can do is focus on what they can do.
Right.
But I do think it's happening, and I do think the government has taken steps on food importation, which of course is a key factor. And in that respect, obviously, British companies, particularly on our side in terms of pork, because we deal with that, has particularly seen a big increase in exports last year, up 34%.
Yeah. All right. We'll take another quick break with Mr. Chris Nelson of the British Chamber. This is Business and Politics on SMNI.
Pamilya, pwede rin pang negosyo. Paborita, bro, at Scarlet, pwede bizcocho. Oh, tunay na masarap at kakanap. Hanapin mo, halina, tikman ang sarap nito. Deliver door to door, via sunshine to your door. Oh, sagot sa buong araw, swak na swak sa paglasan. Sarap ng sunshine spread at sunshine to your door. Yeah.
Looking for a reliable security partner? Whatever your needs, we have the right team for you. King's Trooper Security Agency is your best partner in this ever-changing world. With our well-trained and equipped security personnel, King's Trooper Security Agency offers security force. Our troops will protect your assets with the highest degree of excellence. Executive protection. We are your trusted shield of protection and always there when you are vulnerable. Private investigation service, because we believe that security never sleeps. Security survey, to satisfy your security needs. Excellent customer service, because what is important for you is our responsibility. K9 unit service, to ensure minimize loss and maximize safety. CCTV installation, so that you can focus on tomorrow. Emergency response team, we have dedicated team with on-time response. Don't leave your future at the hands of change. Our troops never compromise. For your safety and your assets, choose King's Trooper Security Agency, the power to security.
We're watching Business and Politics. This is SMNI. We're talking to Mr. Chris Nelson. Again, just going back on the point you were saying that, we have to play to our strengths. What kind of industries have you noticed are looking at the Philippines versus, elsewhere in Asia? What kind of businesses are we attracting?
Well, specifically for us, I think, I have to take the question into two areas, or three, I'd say. So the first is that when we were dealing, we had a specific project with the UK government that's kind of finished, but we still do the work. We're still very active. We were very heavily involved in food and beverage and consumer goods, right?
Okay.
And the Philippine market is attractive for that because of the 110. It's a very young population, therefore it's dynamic. So we still see that, and I mentioned obviously in terms of food imports, we've done particularly well with British pork exporters. So last year up 34% to a record figure. Now, the other area I've mentioned is specifically on energy. Mm-hmm. So renewable energy will be a key focus in the Philippines.
Are there opportunities there, you think?
I think there is. I mean, obviously they've decided you can have 100% renewable, foreign investment can be 100% renewable energy. The UK has expertise in there. I think
Absolutely.
people will start to look at that. I think then linking that is the infrastructure projects.
Okay.
Now, UK companies are involved. They tend to be involved, though, as part of an overall contract that
I
may
see.
be designed. And the question then is to look at how they can further facilitate companies being involved. And will that require, coming back to the earlier discussion on barriers, they can invest, right? Because that may make a factor. And why do I raise this? I think those are areas they can come into, right? Education as well has always been a very close area. A lot of obviously skilled companies in that area. And education is always going to be a key demand, particularly in a country with a growing population, right? And that's something to highlight. I'd say that's also an advantage of the Philippines because, as you know, there are countries in the world which have a declining population.
Absolutely.
Or aging population is a better way of putting it. The Philippines is young and dynamic, and that is a big factor as well. So I think there are definite areas that companies can be interested in. And we've just got to, keep that momentum going forward and keep highlighting to people there are these opportunities. Because I guess the other thing I come to is, if you're looking at the UK, first of all, of course, you've got to look at the own economic challenges of the UK market. Second to that, of course, is where do they operate? Traditionally, obviously, Europe is next door, so it tends to be advantageous. But then, of course, we had the Brexit vote, and the actual leaving of the EU was December 2020. The vote was 2016, but we actually left in 2020.
You were mentioning cybersecurity earlier, and you said that you took a moment there to say that that's an important
I think it
field.
is.
Are there opportunities there as well in terms of British and Philippine cooperation?
Oh, I think so, definitely. I mean, we've got a few companies already. As I said, one of our members is CyberQ.
Okay.
They're a UK company, but they also have a Philippine affiliate and one in the US. And I think cybersecurity is a significant area. It's been highlighted also by President Marcos. And if you look at cybersecurity, it cuts across not just financial institutions, but all institutions.
Right.
I mean, many companies need to protect their data.
Right.
So I think cybersecurity will be a continuing need, particularly as any country, and the Philippines will go that way, as more and more of the e-commerce is developed. We've seen e-commerce develop strongly during the pandemic. Obviously, in all fairness, there's been a reversion back. I mean, you can see that from the malls, from people have gone back to the traditional form.
Right.
But nonetheless, the deals or the business transactions in e-commerce are much higher now than they were 3 years ago. And I think that's going to continue. I mean, look at the growth in Gcash and these things, right? Yeah. And all that, obviously, cybersecurity is key. So yes, it will be a key factor.
Right. You were mentioning earlier how good it was for some of our key officials take the time to go to London and promote the Philippines. Are you seeing similar promotional efforts from our neighbors here? And
oh, for sure. I mean, your neighbors will always be very active, right? And I also want to be. And some of them have long-standing relations. I mean, let's not forget. I mean,
the Commonwealth.
The Commonwealth. Yeah. The UK has very strong ties with Singapore, with Malaysia. It's had long-standing ties with Thailand, actually. Right. So the Philippines, of course, not that, but it's being developed.
Okay.
If I look at some of the institutions we work with, I mean, there's one called the UK ASEAN Business Council. You'll see a lot of activities for Indonesia, for Malaysia, for Singapore, Vietnam. So I can't underscore enough that I believe that the visits by the economic team do have a very beneficial impact, but you've got to keep the momentum going.
Right.
So it kind of needs, further reinforcement, right, that the Philippines continues to open up, that there are success stories here, that the government, as stated, would obviously welcome to get much higher foreign direct investment. And I think there's a genuine desire in this administration to actually open up the economy.
Right. And, I think the last time we met, you were saying you were cautiously optimistic about how things were going. Do you still feel the same way?
Yeah, I do. I mean, look, we started off this year, or the end of last year, actually, and we had one of our traditional, and we put together a wish list. And the wish list was, two of the first on the wish list have already happened. One was for the extension of the lowered tariffs on meat imports. The other one was for the ratification of RCEP. So it's a good start.
Yeah, well, we'll just take another quick break. This is Business and Politics, and SMNI. We're talking to the British Chamber President, Chris Nelson.
Hanap mo ba ay food cart business? At magsimula ng sariling negosyo na hindi kinakailangan ng franchise fee? Mura at abot kayang halaga? Narito ang S&D Food Carts para sa iyo. Ang S&D Food Carts ay gumagawa at nagsusupply ng mga mura at abot kayang halaga ng mga food stalls, buy carts, motor carts, kiosk, food van, mall carts, display racks, tables, chairs, at iba't ibang wood and metal products. Subok na matibay, maaasahan at mapagkakatiwalaan. Ang S&D Food Carts ay mayroong Luzon at Mindanao branch na pwede ninyong lapitan para sa negosyong swak na swak. S&D Food Cart, your partner to success. Problema nyo, itawag kay Panelo. Ikaw ba'y may suliranin na may kinalaman sa mga ahensya ng ating pamahalaan? Inihahandog ng SMNI ang programang makakapiling ninyo sa araw-araw na maaari ninyong maging daingan. Tampok ang dating Chief Legal Counsel ng nakaraang Pangulo, ang veteranong abogado na si Attorney Salvador Sal Panelo.
Bishops.
Tulong at payo tagapamagitan sa ating mga lingkod bayan. Problema nyo, itawag kay Panelo. Lunes hanggang Biyernes, alas 9 hanggang alas 10 ng umaga. Dito lamang sa SMNI. Ang totoong boses ng bayan.
Welcome back to Business and Politics. This is Chris Nelson of the British Chamber. You were saying play to our strengths, and you mentioned people, right? There's a lot of things going on in the education sector in the Philippines as well. They say that it is essentially in a crisis. People talk about not just now but for many years about the job mismatch issue. What are your thoughts here? Because I think you're also involved, or you were involved in a school here, but it's an international school. But I'm sure education is something that you've been also paying attention to.
Yes, I mean, so I was chairman of a school here for 3 years. I think I was called Doma Scholar. It's a school in Pasig, and yes, it was embracing the IB, International Baccalaureate. And my children, of course, have done the International Baccalaureate via the British School of Manila.
Okay.
So I do think that the Philippines needs to, I mean, I'm not competent enough to talk about specifics of the local state, but Education.
But maybe from the industry standpoint.
So yeah,
right?
I think education needs an investment, training. Filipinos are very adept to learn new skills.
Yeah.
But you got to keep up those skill levels, right? I mean, obviously, one of the key advantages in the Philippines, and that's why it's obviously developed so strongly within the business outsourcing sector, obviously, is your skills in English, right? Because that obviously helps as a business language.
Right.
The second is to be on top of those skills needed in terms of obviously computer skills, internet skills, and then of course in terms of education and training. And again, I'll come back to, dare I say, barriers, I have to say, because in the Philippines, if I remember correctly, you can't have a foreign institution here currently.
Right. In education.
In education.
Yeah.
You can partner,
right,
but you can't have it, which is obviously different to many other countries.
Right.
So I think if I go to Malaysia, you'll find an English university can have an office there. So I think the Philippines needs to look at that area, needs to embrace and keep up those standards, because it has been obviously the outsourcing sector, the BPO has been a great job provider. And I do think on top of that, that can be a springboard for bringing in people because they can get talent, right? And then again, look at where your talent is going, right? Obviously, healthcare is a key one. Shipping is another one. I mean, I think I'm assume most of the seamen in the merchant, or most of the ships are Filipinos.
Filipino, yeah.
And because they're skilled at it, they know their jobs. So it's education crisis. I think it needs investment. It needs an open mind. And I would say, again, it needs to be opened up if it can, right?
But you've run some Philippine companies, some very large ones. And, from your experience and maybe from what you've heard from your members, how serious is the job mismatch? I mean, is that something to be, because they're talking about that now, and in terms of trying to review the curriculum, right, and see how they can improve the sector.
Well, look, I ran Philip Morris here for 10 years, and then we combined with Fortunes and became PMFDC.
Yeah.
So I can specifically talk about that. 98%, maybe 9%, was Philippine workforce. Yeah. Of course, we had expatriate workforce or foreign talent in certain key sectors.
Sure.
I think that the one area I would kind of emphasize is maybe decision making.
Okay.
I think that the Philippines tends to be relatively hierarchical, if I use that term. Obviously, I was working for an American company, but American, British, European, we're very open. I mean, we don't believe in Mr. Sir, we're all first name.
Right.
We believe in feedback. We believe in being challenged in the sense that
the Filipinos are not used to that.
Well, we believe in the role that, for example, if you have a meeting and there may be 10 people, maybe the most junior person will have the best idea.
Yeah.
And we embrace that. I'm not sure that always happens here. And I think I just use that as an example because I think that when I look at things, sometimes you need that to move things forward, right? In terms of skills, I think the Filipinos have got all the innate talent. There is no issue in terms of that. I do see, though, tremendous benefit based on my experience when you see Filipinos who've worked abroad and come back. Because they bring with them an experience and an outlook that I think is highly beneficial.
Okay.
Now, I'll give you another example. So I'm also on the board, funny enough, we just had the annual meeting today of Dual Tech Training, Dual Tech.
Oh, okay.
So this is a charity. So the idea of that function institution is that there is a lot of opportunities for people who don't necessarily go to university or college, but, key skills.
Right.
Engineering, in those areas. And we provide that and then find them placement with key companies.
Is the Chamber doing something similar? I mean, in terms of maybe working with some institutions that...
To be honest with you, no, we're not.
Okay.
To be honest. We do, obviously, webinars. We do events with companies that do that.
But is that a practical thing to recommend to industries? I mean, I know it sounds good, right? And obviously it can be beneficial. But from an industry standpoint, is that something that you think would help you, or would be more of a an added burden or task, right?
I don't see the chamber doing it specifically, to be honest. I think it would be, but I do think we can always take the opportunity to highlight, and I think, what we've tried to do is, let's talk about the chamber. So the chamber's key role is for its members.
Right.
It's a non-stock, non-profit. We're there for our 300 members plus. But each member has a sort of different needs. We have very large...
Different industries, different
We have very
scale,
large corporations, and we have some small corporates.
Yeah.
And the needs of each one is going to be different.
Right.
So we tried to do that, right? So to give you an example, pre-pandemic, and obviously that's coming back now, where we get somebody to put on HR skills training or specific. Generally, that will be the SMEs or MMSEs who want that. Large corporates will have that, right?
Right.
They'll come to you for different reasons.
I see.
So you're challenged because there's a great cross-section of different companies.
Right.
But training and education is a key discussion point, right?
Okay.
So today, right, as we speak, we have at least 6 interns working in the chamber.
Okay.
From 3 different institutions.
Right.
3 different universities or colleges in the Philippines. Right. And we've actively encouraged this.
Right.
And we've had many, many interns over the 9 years I've been there. And it's been highly beneficial to us. And I'd like to think it's been highly beneficial for them. And they get to experience, and it's part of their course, of course, but we welcome it. And I think it's great because then they can kind of work on cross, like now we're working on the festival, so we're trying to talk.
Yeah, you mentioned that. Tell us about that. What's going to happen?
Well, look, okay, so the festival is going to be 2 key sections. So the first is we've already recruited over 30 UK companies.
Okay.
Who will have their own displays, will have their own activity, and will reach out to the public during that weekend. And those companies range from, I can name, the key ones people will know, Shell, HSBC, Peru Live, but much smaller ones, right? We got One World Butcher, who is one of our members, who brings in British pork. Oh. We'll have Union Jack Tavern, which, as you can tell, is very British.
Yeah.
And then we'll also have for people an education sector, British School of Manila, Nord Anglia, we've got Southfield, we've got others there. And then we're going to show the cultural side, of course. We're going to get bands who, of course, can do the Beatles, can do all these. And, of course, we can't do anything without Shakespeare. Yeah. That we have to have. But I think it's going to give everybody an overview and say there are British companies here, there are opportunities, and we want to highlight that back to people both ways.
Right. When is this happening again, Chris?
It's the 25th, 26th of March.
All right. Well, coming up pretty soon. Well, Chris, it's been a very interesting discussion. I wish we had more time, but maybe that only means that we should invite you again on another time. Thank you. But before we go, maybe you'd like to leave a brief message to our audience?
Sure. So first of all, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Dante Klink. Thank you very much to your audience for listening. And I'd just like to highlight a couple of points, if I may. Number one, please, everybody come along to the Bonifacio Global City, BGC. It'll be the Saturday the 25th and Sunday the 26th of March. And it will be in the main center between 5th and I think it's 7th Avenue, right next to the One Mall Square. But more importantly, the British Chamber of Commerce is delighted to be in the Philippines. We're delighted to work, obviously, and congratulate you and thank you for this opportunity to discuss. And more importantly, we like to see continuing success for the country and obviously a close partnership between the two countries. It already exists, but even stronger.
Well, I don't know if I told you this, but the Manila Times was founded by a Brit living in Manila way back in 1898. But that's another episode.
For another time when we come back.
Right. So thank you once again, Chris. And I'd like to thank all the viewers watching this program and watching the replay. I'd like to thank Pastor Apollo Kibuloy for making this program possible. This has been This is Some Politics. I'll see you next week. Chris?
Thank you very much. It was very good.
Yeah.